For hundreds of years, the Dacians have existed somewhere between myth and a small note in history books, pushed aside by the greatness of Rome and left out of many common European history accounts. They've been described as strange tribes who just vanished after Rome took over. But what if that wasn't how their story ended? What if science, particularly modern genetic studies, is now showing that the Dacians never really disappeared and that their heritage runs through the blood of millions of Europeans alive today? In several major new studies, scientists have started to reveal the deep roots of the Dacian people using old DNA taken from grave sites across today's Romania and nearby areas. The results are truly amazing. They not only prove the Dacians were a unique and deeply mixed group, but they also reveal how their genetic mark survived the chaos of empires, mass movements, and time itself. Far from being erased, the Dacians are being found again in data, in DNA code, and in the silent survival of their family lines. This video isn't just about old civilizations and crumbling stones, it's about how science can change the way we see our history, and how the Dacians, once thought of as a lost people, are coming back as important figures in the story of Europe's genetic and cultural growth. You'll discover how archaeologists, historians, and scientists are rebuilding a forgotten identity, and how the traces of Dacia still exist today in ways most people never knew. So, get ready. We're about to go back thousands of years with the help of science to discover a people whose story is only now starting to be shared. This is the genetic rebirth of the Dacians. For most of history, the Dacians were barely more than a vague figure in old writings. Roman writers like Dio and Trajan's column in Rome showed them as strong, wild fighters, worthy enemies who fought Roman control longer than most. But apart from their last battles and their loss, very little was known about who the Dacians really were. Today, through archaeology and now genetics, we are starting to see a much more complete, deeper picture. The Dacians lived mainly in what is now modern Romania and parts of nearby nations. They flourished between roughly 500 BCE and 100 CE. Their homeland was a hilly, thickly wooded area that gave them natural protection and kept them separate from some of the bigger empires of that era. Far from being simple tribal people, the Dacians built complicated fortified towns known as davai, created advanced religious centers, and developed unique artistic forms, especially in metalwork. Their skill in gold, silver, and iron matched anything made by their Mediterranean neighbors. In terms of language, the Dacians spoke a tongue that was Indo-European but different, likely connected to Thracian and perhaps even sharing old roots with modern Albanian. Though this is still argued among experts, their religious beliefs centered around a chief god, Zalmoxis, and many old writers noted the Dacians' deep spirituality and faith in the soul's eternal life. Politically, the Dacians managed to unite under strong kings like Burebista and Decebalus, who brought smaller tribes together into a powerful state. Under Decebalus, Dacia grew strong enough to deal with and repeatedly challenge the mighty Roman Empire until Emperor Trajan started a full invasion in the early 2nd century CE. But maybe the most interesting thing about the Dacians is how they existed between worlds. They were not completely part of the classical Mediterranean culture, yet they were strongly linked to it through trade, war, and cultural contact. Greek items have been discovered in Dacian sites, as well as Roman objects, suggesting that while the Dacians fought these civilizations, they also communicated with and learned from them. What really makes the Dacians stand out, however, was their toughness. Even after the Roman takeover, Dacian ways did not just fade away. Roman Dacia became one of the most heavily militarized and Romanized provinces, but the genetic and cultural marks of the native Dacians lasted beneath the Roman surface. And now, with old DNA testing, we can start to see just how much of the Dacian people survived, adjusted, and kept shaping the region long after Rome itself collapsed. In short, the Dacians were much more than a defeated people. They were a complicated, lively civilization at the meeting point of Europe, whose story is only now being fully revealed. Thanks to a new partnership between archaeology and genetics, the Dacians are coming out of the fog of legend and claiming their proper place in the great pattern of European history. For hundreds of years, what we understood about the Dacians came mainly from old texts and artifacts. But today, thanks to progress in old DNA technology, we are now able to look under the surface. Actually, scientists have started reading the genetic code of bone remains found in what was once Dacian land. And what they're finding is changing our knowledge of who these people were and where they came from. Ancient DNA, or ADNA, is taken from human remains like bones and teeth, often discovered in burial grounds. For the Dacians, several important dig sites in Romania and nearby regions have provided well-kept remains. From these, researchers have pulled out genetic material that has been stored away for almost 2,000 years using modern reading technologies. These pieces have been put together to create a genetic map of the old Dacian people. So, what does the Dacian genetic code reveal? For one thing, it proves that the Dacians were a genetically combined group. Their DNA reveals a mix of three main ancestral sources: Western European hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers from the Near East, and steppe herders linked to the Indo-European movements. This combination matches what scientists call the three-part model of European ancestry: A pattern of groups that traveled and mixed over thousands of years. What makes the Dacians especially interesting is the balance of these parts. While much of Central and Western Europe leaned heavily toward Neolithic and steppe ancestry by the time of the Iron Age, Dacian samples reveal a surprisingly strong local Mesolithic part. This means that the area may have kept more of its native hunter-gatherer ancestry than we thought before, making it a genetic time pocket of sorts, a place where older European bloodlines lasted longer than in other places. Another interesting discovery is the existence of certain unique genetic signs that connect the Dacians to nearby Thracian and Illyrian groups. These signs help prove that there were genetic as well as cultural links across the Balkans, supporting the idea that the Dacians were part of a bigger, loosely linked family of tribes. Also, small traces of Anatolian and even Iranian-related ancestry hint at more distant contacts through trade or old movements, possibly from Bronze Age shifts that came before the Dacians themselves. Importantly, these genetic discoveries also reveal continuation into the Roman era. Although the Romans placed large numbers of people in the province of Dacia, the core population kept a substantial amount of pre-conquest DNA. This directly goes against older theories that the Dacians were destroyed or fully absorbed. Instead, the genetics reveal that the locals adjusted and survived, mixing with newcomers but keeping their own heritage alive in the process. As more Dacian genetic codes are read in the coming years, we'll probably learn even more about the regional differences within Dacia, their social systems, and even their health and food. For now, ancient DNA has done something amazing. It has brought the Dacians to life in a way that no old scroll or weapon ever could. Through their genes, these forgotten people are sharing their story loud and clear. The Dacians weren't created from one single movement or ancestral group. They were a living, breathing pattern woven together over thousands of years. If the ancient world was a meeting point, then Dacia was one of its busiest junctions. The area absorbed waves of people, ideas, and genes. The outcome? A population that was as complicated as the rough land they lived in. Recent genetic studies are now giving us a clearer view of how three major ancestral threads, steppe, Balkan, and Thracian, came together to form the Dacian identity. Let's start with the steppe impact. Around 3000 BCE, herding tribes from the Pontic-Caspian steppe spread across Europe. These were the Yamnaya, a group thought to have brought Indo-European languages. Their genetic mark, shown by a specific Y-DNA haplogroup known as R1b, swept across the continent. In Dacian remains, this steppe ancestry is clearly present. It didn't fully take over the local gene pool, but it combined with it. These steppe genes are connected not only to physical features like height and face shape, but also to cultural changes, horse taming, burial habits, and possibly warrior traditions that appear later in Dacian society. But Dacia wasn't an empty land when the steppe herders came. The Balkans had already been home to Neolithic farmers and Mesolithic hunter-gatherers for thousands of years. These early groups had their own distinct genetic marks, often connected to mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child. In Dacian samples, we see a surprisingly high keeping of this Balkan ancestry, evidence that the older population didn't disappear but joined with newcomers. This ancient Balkan thread gives the Dacians a deep connection with the land they occupied, linking them genetically to some of Europe's oldest farming communities. Then there's the Thracian link. The Thracians were a collection of tribes living just to the south of Dacia in parts of modern-day Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. They shared linguistic, religious, and artistic features with the Dacians, but until recently, we weren't certain how close they were genetically. Ancient DNA now shows a strong overlap between Dacian and Thracian genetic codes, enough to indicate that these were not just neighbors, but relatives. Both groups carry a mix of steppe and Balkan genes, but the amounts differ slightly. Some Dacians, especially those near the southern edge, show almost matching genetic profiles to Thracian individuals. This points to regular intermarriage, shared ancestry, and possibly even changing tribal identities between the two. The genetic story also suggests smaller, less expected impacts. There are minor traces of Anatolian and even Caucasus ancestry, perhaps remains from old trade paths or refugee groups that settled over time. These are faint echoes, but they reveal how open Dacia's borders really were. In the end, the Dacians weren't a fixed or pure people. They were active and changing. Their DNA shows a blend of powerful steppe bloodlines, rooted Balkan continuation, and close Thracian family ties. They were both a result of their land and a mirror of the wider ancient world. In understanding this pattern, we don't just learn about Dacia. We learn how ancient Europe itself was built, not by separation, but by constant movement, mixing, and exchange. When Rome entered Dacia in 106 CE, it wasn't just a fight between empires, it was a meeting of worlds. The Roman conquest of Dacia under Emperor Trajan is one of the most well-recorded military campaigns of the ancient world, honored in the detailed carvings of Trajan's column in Rome. But beyond the battles, forts, and armies, something even more lasting happened: the biological mixing of two very different populations. And, today, through the view of DNA, we're finally starting to understand how this meeting shaped the genetic map of the area. Before the Romans came, the Dacians were already a culturally and genetically diverse group. As we've seen, their ancestry was a mix of Balkan, steppe, and Thracian impacts. But the Roman conquest marked a shift, a moment when the genetic makeup of the region started to change dramatically. The Roman Empire didn't just defeat by sword, it settled by placing soldiers, craftsmen, and leaders in the lands it controlled. Dacia was no different. After the conquest, the Romans built new cities, roads, and mining sites. Along with them came people from every corner of the empire: Italians from the Apennine Peninsula, Gauls from what is now France, Iberians from Spain, Greeks from the Aegean coast, and even North Africans and Syrians. Genetic data from post-conquest graves shows an arrival of foreign DNA markers linked to southern Europe and the Mediterranean, which were mostly absent in pre-Roman Dacian samples. This genetic addition didn't destroy the Dacian line, but it did weaken and vary it. Over time, local Dacians intermarried with Roman settlers, creating a new mixed population. These genetic exchanges weren't always peaceful. Some came through force, slavery, or political control, but they were widespread and lasting. Archaeological discoveries even reveal that many Roman soldiers retired in Dacia, married local women, and passed down both their genes and their customs to the next generation. Interestingly, this Roman-Dacian combination helped create the base for modern Romanian identity. Even though the Romans left Dacia around 271 CE due to military pressures, the genetic and cultural heritage of their presence continued. Latin kept influencing the language. Roman customs shaped local habits, and Roman genes became part of the region's biological makeup. Scientists today can see clear proof of this meeting. In the genetic codes of modern Romanians, there's a significant Mediterranean part, one that matches Italian, Iberian, and Balkan populations. These aren't distant echoes. They're evidence of a deep, ancient mixing that started during the Roman occupation of Dacia. But it's not just about bloodlines. The genetic meeting between Dacians and Romans is also a story of cultural adjustment. Roman burial forms, pottery, clothing, and buildings blended with local traditions. Even after the empire departed, its impact lived on in the people. So, while Trajan may have claimed victory through conquest, the real legacy of Rome and Dacia wasn't military. It was genetic. The Dacian-Roman meeting created a new blended population, one whose DNA still tells stories of empire, resistance, and change. The Dacians may have disappeared as a political group nearly 2,000 years ago, but their heritage didn't vanish. Instead, it took root quietly, deeply, and across generations within the very DNA of modern populations. Through the view of modern genetics, we now know that the Dacians never truly disappeared. Their genetic prints are still alive in the people of Romania and nearby regions, hidden in chromosomes and quietly forming the heritage of millions. Modern genetic studies in Eastern and Southeastern Europe reveal a fascinating continuation with ancient populations, including the Dacians. When researchers compare ancient DNA samples recovered from Dacian archaeological sites with DNA from today's Romanian populations, the links are clear. There's a strong presence of shared genetic markers, especially in mitochondrial DNA passed down from mothers and autosomal DNA, which combines contributions from both parents that show a significant portion of the ancient Dacian genetic code lives on. But this heritage isn't limited to Romania. Neighboring populations in Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, and Moldova also show traces of Dacian-related ancestry. This makes sense when you think about how borders have moved over the centuries and how people have traveled, mixed, and migrated. The genetic heritage of the Dacians goes beyond modern national lines, reminding us that ancient peoples were far more connected than we often think. One particularly interesting aspect is how Dacian heritage has lasted despite major invasions and movements. After the Romans left Dacia, waves of Goths, Huns, Slavs, and others moved through the region. Later came the Ottomans, Hungarians, Austrians, and Russians. Each left some genetic mark, but the core Dacian ancestry survived. It became part of a layered genetic story, not wiped out, but mixed, like ancient foundation beneath newer layers of cultural buildup. Even beyond genetics, Dacian heritage can be seen in cultural traditions, language roots, folklore, and even place names. Romanian, while a Romance language formed by Latin, also carries substrate impacts, pieces of vocabulary and grammar that may go back to Dacian and Thracian languages. Rural customs and ancient symbols carved into wood, pottery, and fabrics also show striking similarity to those found at pre-Roman Dacian sites. However, it's the genetic continuation that gives the strongest and most real link to the past. Scientists often describe modern Romanian genetic codes as a unique pattern, a blend of ancient Balkan, Dacian, Roman, Slavic, and other parts. This rich mix isn't just a list of percentages, it's a living record of thousands of years of adjustment, toughness, and survival. Importantly, this heritage helps correct outdated stories. The Dacians were long shown as a people lost to time, swallowed by Roman conquest. But DNA reveals that they didn't disappear. They merged, survived, and changed. Their descendants walk among us today, not only in Romania but across the region, carrying bits of ancient memory in every cell. So, when we talk about Dacian heritage, we're not only talking about ruins and artifacts. We're talking about people, living, breathing individuals who unknowingly carry forward one of Europe's oldest stories. That's the true power of genetics, to reconnect the past to the present in the most personal way possible. The story of the Dacians isn't just a local or regional tale. It's part of a much larger story that changes how we understand the history of all of Europe. Thanks to progress in genetic research, especially ancient DNA testing, the Dacians have become more than just a small note in Roman history. They're now seen as a key puzzle piece in the vast and complicated pattern of ancient European peoples, and their genetic code is helping to rewrite what we thought we knew about Europe's early inhabitants. For a long time, much of European history was built through archaeology, historical texts, and language studies. These methods gave us great knowledge, but also left gaps and sometimes led to wrong ideas, particularly the belief that ancient populations were neat, separate groups living in clear territories with little mixing. DNA has broken down that old framework. The Dacians, as shown by genetic research, are proof that Europe was always active, changing, and connected. Their genetic code reveals a combination of Neolithic farmer ancestry, Indo-European steppe heritage, and local Mesolithic forager lines. This blend is not only genetically rich, it also tells us something deep about how ancient cultures formed. The Dacians weren't a separated mountain tribe or a minor provincial group. They were part of the same broad waves of movement and interaction that shaped the entire continent. This changes how we look at the ancient European map. Instead of separate tribes moving around in strict order, we start to see overlapping zones of power, constant cultural exchanges, and intermarriage between neighbors and migrants. Dacia wasn't a fringe. It was a crossroads. This has important meaning for how we define identity. For centuries, people in Europe and elsewhere have looked to ancient groups as symbols of national pride or origin stories. But genetics shows us that identity was never fixed. The Dacians themselves were not a pure people, but a mixture of older populations, and their heritage, in turn, has mixed with many more since. The Dacian genetic code also repositions Eastern Europe in the historical story. Too often, ancient Eastern Europe has been overshadowed by the histories of Greece, Rome, and Western Europe. But the genetic proof highlights the central role regions like Dacia played in shaping the genetic and cultural story of the continent. These lands were not backwaters. They were places where major movements came together and new identities were born. What's even more exciting is that the Dacians are just one example. As scientists read more ancient DNA from burial sites across the continent, we're discovering that many so-called lost peoples are still with us, written in the genes of modern populations. This growing field is allowing us to find invisible histories, ones that were erased from texts or never written down at all. In short, Dacian DNA doesn't just tell us who they were. It tells us who we all are, or at least who we came from. It invites us to rethink Europe not as a collection of separate stories, but as a long shared journey full of mixing, movement, and change. The story of the Dacians is far from finished. In fact, it may just be starting, thanks to the constantly growing abilities of genetic research. As technology develops, so does our ability to rebuild the past with greater accuracy and detail. For the Dacians, whose heritage was long overshadowed by empires and erased by time, this is a powerful opportunity for rediscovery and redefinition. Future digs and genetic studies promise to uncover more Dacian burial sites, allowing researchers to map not just who the Dacians were genetically, but how they lived, moved, married, traded, and adjusted across centuries. High-resolution DNA testing can now detect patterns across family lines, population movements, and even trace specific ancestries through maternal and paternal markers. This means we're on the edge of being able to build detailed genetic maps that show the Dacians not as fixed people frozen in time, but as a lively, changing culture interacting with its environment and neighbors. At the same time, the meaning for modern identity are deep. As Romanians, Moldovans, and others in the Balkans increasingly explore their roots, genetic data offers a shared point of connection, one that goes beyond myths or politics. It doesn't replace history or culture. It makes both deeper. DNA allows people today to understand that their heritage isn't based only on language or borders, but on real biological continuation with the ancient past. In the end, the future of Dacian identity lies in combining science with storytelling, giving voice to those long silent, and placing their journey within the broader human story. In the coming years, as labs decode more genetic codes and archaeology uncovers more secrets, the Dacians may finally step out of the shadows and take their rightful place as one of Europe's foundational peoples.